A few weeks in, and we're starting to see real patterns at wide receiver. Who's commanding targets, who's boomer bust, and who is about to take over. Let's break down the top 36 wide receivers you can count on in week 6. What's up, Headliner Nation? My name is Brad, the Rankings King, and before we dive into this week's rankings, just a reminder that these are the consensus rankings between Jake and Kyle. And for more detailed analysis, be sure to check out the start-sit videos from Kyle already posted this week on the channel. If you want even more breakdowns each week, make sure to join the Fantasy Headliners community by hitting the join button below. That's going to get you access to extra rankings like our flex, kicker, defense, and an exclusive spot inside of our Discord. Now, before we dive into week 6 rankings, we've got a few hits and misses from week number 5. Our first hit is, of course, Emeka Egbuka, and by far the best call of the year on this channel. He just continues to dominate weekly. We put him all the way up in tier 1 last week, and he delivered as the wide receiver 1 overall on the week. Next up, we've got Deebo Samuel, and another receiver that we loved all offseason, and week in and week out, he continues to be the safest wide receiver in Washington. We ranked him at wide receiver 9 last week, and he finished at wide receiver 6. Our next hit is T. Higgins, and week after week, it seems like we drop Higgins further and further thanks to Jake Browning. And last week, we ranked him as the wide receiver 35, and he finished at wide receiver 30. All right, next up, let's look at a couple of our misses. What about Jamar Chase? Hey, unlike Higgins, we see Browning at least trying to get Chase the ball. It worked in week 5, and of course, with how things had been going, we had Chase way too low. Next up is Stephon Diggs, and you could tell coming into the game that the plan was to just get Diggs the ball. 10 catches for 146 yards later, and it didn't matter that we had him in the top 30. We should have had him in the top 10. Our last miss is Jalen Waddle, and he got a chance to be the number 1 guy, and he drew the coverage of Sauce Gardner. We still put him all the way to wide receiver 21, but he finished at wide receiver 4 on the week after that long touchdown reception. All right, that's it for the hits and misses from week 5. Let's look at tier number 1 for week 6. We've got Puka Nacua, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Drake London, Rome Odunze, Emeka Egbuka, Devontae Adams, and Deebo Samuel. Topping the list at number 1, we've got Puka Nacua, and he just became the first player with 50 receptions through the first 5 games of the year. Stafford to Puka is unstoppable right now, and add in a Ravens matchup, and it's just a chef's kiss. At number 2, we've got Jackson Smith and Jigba, and he's currently the wide receiver 4 on the year and has had at least 11 fantasy points in every game this year. And he isn't just relying on touchdowns, he's had at least 90 total yards in every game this year, and the Jags allow almost 27.6 fantasy points per game to wide receivers. At number 3, we've got Amon-Ra St. Brown, and since that week 1 stinker that we told you about and we said not to worry about it, he hasn't had less than 14 fantasy points in a game. He's had 7+ receptions in 4 straight games, and with a tough Kansas City run defense, we expect Goff to try and air it out. This game could quickly turn into a shootout. At number 4, we've got Drake London, and coming off the bye, he does not get an easy matchup. Buffalo allows the 9th fewest fantasy points per game to wide receivers, and so London's going to need a lot of volume this week. Luckily, in both of the games this year where he's been healthy, he's had at least 10 targets. At number 5, we've got Rome Odunze, and coming off the bye as well, all of his fantasy owners are hoping that he picks up where he left off. Touchdowns in every game this year, and he's the clear number 1 target for Caleb Williams. It's also going to help that Washington allows the 12th most fantasy points per game to wide receivers. At number 6, we've got Emeka Egbuka, and the question is being asked, is Egbuka going to break the rookie record of 1,486 yards set by Puka? Right now, Egbuka is on pace for 1,513 yards, and we're hoping that he can do to the 49ers this week what Puka did to them last week. At number 7, we've got Devontae Adams, and he's the current wide receiver 14 on the year, even though his teammate Puka Nacua is the number 1 option. We're seeing Adams get real targets and big plays almost weekly, and he's had at least 11 fantasy points in 4 straight games, and now they get this juicy matchup against Baltimore and their non-existent defense. At number 8, we've got Deebo Samuel. Now, there's a chance that Terry returns, but Deebo has been the most consistent producer in this offense. And so because of that, he's up to wide receiver 7 overall on this season, and now he gets a primetime game against the Bears defense. All right, that's it for tier number 1. Now, before we head into the next tier, I want to make sure that you're all set up on Underdog. You already know that we're crushing those player pick'ems on Underdog this year, so what are you waiting for? Head over to Underdog Fantasy or download the app, create a new account, and just use the referral code HEADLINERS when you do so. Then just make your initial deposit and come join a contest. And check this out. If you sign up with that promo code, again, it's HEADLINERS, you're going to get access to all of the promos that Underdog offers weekly. And listen to this. Once you play your first $5, they're going to give you $100 in bonus funds. That's right. Play 5, get 100. It's that easy. And don't forget that Jake is going to be breaking down the best picks weekly in our show on Fridays. So links to join are in the description below, and we'll look forward to playing with you this week. All right. Let's get into tier number 2. We've got Jamar Chase, George Pickens, Xavier Worthy, Ted McMillan, Cortland Sutton, Jalen Waddle, Quentin Johnston, Michael Pittman Jr., and Garrett Wilson. At number 9, we've got Jamar Chase, and having a big Chase week last week was exactly what the doctor ordered. Now we have a new Bengals quarterback in Joe Flacco. Does this fix everything? We don't think so, but it can't hurt, and let's hope that he at least feeds Chase and in turn feeds fantasy families. At number 10, we've got George Pickens, and he's feasting with Lamb out, and he's all the way up to wide receiver 6 on the season. He's now had 12 plus fantasy points per game in 4 straight games, and statistically, Carolina should be a tough matchup, but Waddle cooked them last week, and Pickens handled Sauce Gardner just fine last week. Sauce who? At number 11, we've got Xavier Worthy, and he had another injury scare in week 5, but seems like he's all good. And so he just missed a couple of big plays, and now with a potential shootout coming up against Detroit, who allows the 6th most fantasy points per game to opposing receivers, the upside is definitely there. At number 12, we've got King Ted McMillan, and we're just waiting for that big breakout game to come. The volume is still there. He's had at least 8 targets in every game, and now he gets a game against a bad Dallas defense who more than likely gets a lead and forces Carolina to throw all game long. At number 13, we've got Cortland Sutton, and typically you see a matchup against Sauce Gardner, that makes you nervous. But if we're being honest, he's been a little mild Sauce Gardner lately because he's gotten torched a lot this season. With 13 plus points in 3 straight games, it's just hard not to trust Sutton. At number 14, we've got Jalen Waddle, and he got his chance at being the wide receiver 1 last week with no Tyreek, and he did not disappoint. He had a season high in targets, receptions, and yards, and there is no reason to think that the volume shouldn't continue against the Chargers this week. Speaking of the Chargers, at number 15, we've got Quentin Johnston, and he had a down game last week, but hey, I mean, the guy's only human. Bad games happen. Now he gets Miami, who's given up a ton of points to quarterbacks, running backs, and tight ends, but weirdly has done well against receivers, allowing the 7th fewest fantasy points per game to them. At number 16, we've got Michael Pittman Jr., and it's all about consistency, and Pittman has been as consistent as prune juice. 5 plus catches and a touchdown in 4 of the 5 games this year, and even the crappy Tennessee offense threw on this Cardinals defense last week. Plus, he has a chance to stick it to his dad's old team. At number 17, we've got Garrett Wilson, and with all of the volume that he gets in New York, he's now all the way up to wide receiver 5. But this will be the toughest matchup that he's had all year. Patrick Surtain is one of the best defensive backs in football, and he will be locked onto Wilson all game. All right, that's it for tier number 2. Let's look at tier number 3. This is Stephon Diggs, DK Metcalf, Marvin Harrison Jr., Keenan Allen, A.J. Brown, Brian Thomas Jr., Kendrick Bourne, Ladd McConkey, Chris Olave, Devontae Smith, and Khalil Shakir. At number 18, we've got Stephon Diggs, and that matchup against Buffalo last week unlocked elite Diggs, and with the way that May was looking his way with success, you have to think that that connection continues this week against the Saints. At number 19, we've got DK Metcalf, and he's coming off a bye, and if we had to guess, Arthur Smith still sucks and won't force more targets to DK. Y'all know we love Arthur Smith. Luckily, the big plays have been there, and DK has touchdowns in 3 straight. It's going to be hard to run on the Browns, so they're going to be throwing the ball. At number 20, we've got Marvin Harrison Jr., and it's taken over a year, but the Cardinals are finally pushing the ball to Marv. He's now had 11 plus fantasy points in back-to-back games, and the biggest question right now is Kyler is questionable this week, and so that's something that we're going to watch because this is going to be a great matchup for Marv if so. At number 21, we've got Keenan Allen, and back-to-back bad games for Keenan, and people are starting to show concern. But with the O-line banged up, along with the run game, the Chargers will have to throw more this week against Miami to pull out a win. At number 22, we've got A.J. Brown, and part of me thinks that they come out this week and force the ball to A.J. Brown, and part of me thinks that Hurts won't have time in the pocket for Brown to get down the field. It's always a risk with A.J., but there is a decent chance at a big game this week. At number 23, we've got Brian Thomas Jr., and we saw the big play potential of BTJ in week 5, and it only resulted in 4 for 80, but Brenton Strange is hurt, so maybe he sees an extra target or 2 from that. Also, it helps that Seahawks defensive back Reek Woolen is in the old watermelon protocol. At number 24, we've got Kendrick Bourne, and he had a huge week 5, being one of the only healthy pass catchers in San Francisco. It's still unclear if Pearsall or Jennings will play this week, but you have to think that Bourne has earned the attention of Mac Jones, and they're going to need to throw on Tampa if they plan to win this game. At number 25, we've got Ladd McConkey, and it's nice to see that the Chargers remembered that Ladd was on the team last week. Everything is short, and so we need volume, and that right there is the biggest concern. As we've already said, though, they will be throwing in Los Angeles a lot this week, and so we have hope. At number 26, we've got Chris Olave, and it feels like Chris Olave has had the most targets for the fewest yards of any wide receiver in forever. 54 targets for 244 yards. That's crazy low. He's had yet to average over 10 yards a reception in a game this year, but this is a decent matchup for him. At number 27, we've got Devontae Smith, and 10 targets for Smith last week, but I guess it makes sense since Surtain was all over A.J. Brown. These guys in Philly rarely go off in the same game, and this week feels a little bit more like the A.J. Brown week to try and make him happy. And at number 28, we've got Khalil Shakir, and he's a reliable weekly flex, and there's so many pass catchers in Buffalo, and Shakir doesn't have the biggest touchdown upside. He needs volume and yards after the catch, and there's a tough matchup against Atlanta, but with Shakir in the slot, he has a chance for some of those dump-off passes. All right, that's it for tier number 3. Now let's look at tier number 4. We've got Wan'Dale Robinson, Romeo Doubs, Calvin Ridley, Zay Flowers, Jameson Williams, T. Higgins, Travis Hunter, and DJ Moore. At 29, we got Jake's boy, Wan'Dale Robinson. First they lost Neighbors, and now Slayton has a hamstring injury, and Dart wants to go deeper down the field, but right now he doesn't have much outside of Wan'Dale and Theo Johnson to throw to. All right, at number 30, we've got Romeo Doubs, and he's coming off the bye, and if you remember, he had a huge 3-touchdown game back in week 4. That isn't likely to happen again, but it is apparent that he is the top target in Green Bay, and with the matchup against Cincinnati, he could be a solid flex this week. At number 31, we've got Calvin Ridley, and coming off his best game of the year, but I think a lot of that had to do with how bad the Arizona defense was. But here's the thing, the Vegas pass defense is bad too. They allow over 32 fantasy points per game to wide receivers, and so there's hope for Ridley. At number 32, we've got Zay Flowers, and Flowers without Lamar makes him no different than anyone else in this tier. Cooper Rush just ain't it, and touchdown opportunities aren't going to be there often. Now they get a Rams defense that's looking to rebound, and so there's a lot of risk here with Flowers. At number 33, we've got Jameson Williams, and he's been more bust than boom in 2025, but you know what that means. He's due. Detroit could easily struggle to move the ball on the ground, and with as much as Kansas City blitzes, don't be surprised if Williams gets a chance or two at a big play this week. At number 34, we've got T. Higgins, and he had a touchdown last week, but it's not like it helped many people. Jake Browning killed the production of Higgins, and he hasn't had over 32 yards in a game since week 2. Now they turn to old Joe Flacco in Cincy, and I mean, he can't be any worse. At number 35, we've got Travis Hunter, and you can see the potential on film. When Hunter has a chance at the ball or he has it in his hands, he looks like he plays at a different speed. With the secondary banged up in Seattle, this could be the week that we see another big Travis Hunter play. At number 36, we've got DJ Moore, and coming off the bye, we have no faith that his role has magically changed. He hasn't had over 50 yards in a game since week 1, and he's averaged under 10 yards a catch in his last 3 games. But the matchup isn't bad, but there's no safety here. All right, that's it for tiers number 1, 2, 3, and 4. And there's a few guys on the outside looking in. We've got Jacoby Myers, Chris Godwin, Keon Coleman, Ricky Pearsall, Juwan Jennings, Matthew Golden, and Rashid Shaheed. And that's how the wide receiver board stacks up for week 6. And we got to know, which wideout are you rolling with, and who's got you a little bit nervous? Make sure to drop it in the comments, smash that like button, and subscribe so you're ready for rankings every week. Let's go get that W, Headliner Nation.
Analytics off the chain, all the channels not the same. Jake and Kyle, you know the name. Headliner Nation, we running the game.